All right, what are we talking about this week? What's the main event?
The main event of the evening is the NWA history.
The National Wrestling Alliance. In honor of their show, their 70th anniversary show today, where I feel it's kind of a rebirth of, I hope anyway.
I hope so as well.
It feels like it's a rebirth of the NWA, but in a way, and we can probably talk about this later, in a way that is relevant to today. Because the NWA of the old, I just do not think would work.
I don't know how it worked when it did. I mean, I guess I do now, but no.
Well, it didn't. It worked because they didn't have
a lot of any options.
Yeah, well, that, and they didn't have instant access to Ric Flair fucking beat 800 people last week because he traveled to every territory. For all you knew, you were like, "This is wrestling. Just the dude's here," and then Ric Flair comes in.
Right? It's like I've heard so much about this guy, but I've never seen him. So how do we... I guess we need to start from the beginning.
Start from the beginning.
So the National Wrestling Association actually started by a man named Tom Pax out of St. Louis and Paul Bowser out of Boston. These were two guys that ran all the wrestling and all the boxing basically during the 30s and early 40s. Now, there was men who were also running wrestling shows that didn't want to deal with these two because of the fact that just the way they were running business, they weren't a fan of it. So they started a pro wrestling alliance, which is actually started by Billy Sandrow and Maxwell Bauman in January 1941. However, the agreement for the actual NWA didn't happen until July 18th, 1948, in Waterloo, Iowa, by 8 men. So that's how we get the 70 years. So 48, that's how it started. And also, in June of 48, Pax had sold his NWA to Lou Thez, Bill Longston, Frank Tunney, which is Jack's daddy, and Eddie Quinn for, it's been rumored to be $360,000, but that is 1948 money. I don't know what the translation.
It's a lot more.
It's a way lot more now. So, and then in 49, Thez agreed to merge because he can't run a company and also be the
he can't be the man.
Yeah, he can't be the man and then also be the man behind the scenes. You can't just do both. So the alliance went from 20 members in November of 1949 to nearly 40 members in September of 1942. So there was a lot of promotions that got on the bandwagon of you're going to have one major champion. There's not going to be any regional champions. You can probably, I'm sure they had secondary titles, but your main title guy was, at this time, it was Lou Thez, and it was going to be somebody else. They're going to have a merge. I should have put that in my notes. I don't know why I didn't. But the guy got in an automobile accident, so they kind of just like, well, all right, well,
Thez. It's Lou Thez.
Yeah, well, congratulations, Lou Thez. You're the man. Let's see. They began putting together lists of banned and blacklisted wrestlers. So basically, if you either no-showed or... I'm pretty sure it came down to a lot of promoters being petty about not wanting to work with certain guys. And so a lot of guys got blacklisted and then banned. And if you're banned from the NWA, you're kind of like...
Especially back then. That was wrestling.
You had no other choice. Because if you were a promotion that you also weren't working with the NWA... They quietly made sure that you did.
It was very mafioso.
Very mafioso. And then the list was put together by Johnny Doyle and Sam Muchnick. So Sam Muchnick was the elected president of the NWA for I want to say it was about 20 years.
He's also he did set the not central states, the St. Louis.
Right. He's the reason why St. Louis was the home of NWA.
Wrestling at the Chase.
Exactly. So that was him. And despite, let's see. So business was growing about $25 million annually. And again, back then, that's a ton of money for back now. In 53, actually, they tried the Health and Wellness Committee, so there was multiple committees to the NWA, presented a $3 per man per show premium for insurance benefits for wrestlers, bookers, and promoters. It would have also provided life insurance up to $10,000.
And what year was this?
This was 1953.
Okay.
It was voted down 25-5. So they said, "Fuck those guys."
So even in the 50s, the promoters were like, "Okay, you can break your body, but we're not paying you."
Yeah, we're not going to pay you a little extra. Good luck.
And that continues to today.
Exactly. Let's see here. Vern Gagne actually left in. I'm sorry. He left in 1960 and started his AWA because he had a falling out with deciding on who the champion was going to be. It was basically back to Lou Thesz, lost a match, but he lost by disqualification, which means we all know the title can't change hands at that time. Mm-hmm. So, of course, he was like, well, I'm going to agree to your new champion, and so I'm out of here, and I'm going to start the AWA.
And guess what? I'm going to make myself champion for 12 million times.
Until I want my son to have it.
I'm gonna be champion until I fucking retire, and he did, and he was.
Vince McMahon Sr. left in 1963 to start the Worldwide Wrestling Federation.
For a while, he came back for a little bit.
So that's the thing is, Gagne and McMahon left, but they were still on the board of directors. So they had their own champion, the regional champion. But then there were also still somehow on the board, so that part doesn't quite make a lot of sense to me.
Well, it's like there are people on the board of my company, the place that I work at, who used to work for us, and now they no longer work for us, but they're still on the board, so they can still vote on decisions and stuff like that. So Vince Sr. and Vern Gagne could probably be like, yeah, I want this dude to be the champion. And if they didn't matter to them, they could probably vote for whoever they wanted to.
Right.
You know?
They still did use NWA talent because at that time you didn't really have a lot of other options.
Yeah, you had your people and then you had the other people.
Right, exactly. Now, by 82, Vince Jr. bought WWF from his dad and chopped off one of those W's and just made WWF.
Say, that's a mouthful. It's too many W's.
Way too many W's. Why do we need so many W's? That's not how Vince talks at all.
I don't know. It sounded more like Dusty Rhodes than anything.
Why do we need so many W's in here? This sounds stupid. Now,
I agree.
You're fucking right. Now, due to by this time, technology had caught up to the fact that you don't need to be in one place, in one building, to watch wrestling. So if you were in Oklahoma, you could probably get Texas wrestling, and the storylines wouldn't add up to what was going on at the time. So technology got ahead of the wrestling game, and Vince Jr. saw that, and he realized that with these deals, he was going to create his own storylines through each episode throughout the country. However, the regional wrestling didn't quite work that way, and that's how NWA's business model, for the most part, worked. So by this time, they had to switch gears, and they tried to...
Hey, DJ Mark here. Unfortunately, we ran into technical difficulties when I was editing the show. Not so much technical difficulties as I didn't know what I was doing and deleted and saved part of the show. I accidentally edited out the end of Rhodey's talk about the early days of the NWA and the segue part where I talk about Pro Wrestling USA, which is, or was, because it was a very short-lived co-promotion between the AWA and the NWA and several regional promotions in the early 80s, or late, I guess mid-80s, when Vince McMahon took the WWF National. So I apologize. We'll do better in the future, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you. Happen.
They didn't work together?
They didn't work together.
What?
Because they were like, booking issues, financial issues, blah, 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 blah. Anyone who knows anything about the wrestling business is not shocked by this.
No.
Especially a wrestling business in the 80s when they were like, I still feel like in the 80s, a lot of NWA promoters were like, in the early 80s, were still like, well, that fucking upstart McMahon, it's fine. It's just a flash in the pan. It'll be fine. Not realizing that with the advent of cable TV, weekly syndicated shows in so many markets, that the WWE was now the brand of professional wrestling in the United States. Like, I don't think any of these people had any idea.
Vince saw it, though. He
absolutely did.
Get all the TV deals together, get all the merchandising deals together, and that's how we're going to go about it.
And that's how he built it. And so, the NWA has had a board of directors for the longest time, and they decided who was champion. Blah 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 blah. So Jim Crockett Jr. decides that he's going to go national. He's going to fight fire with Vince.
I'm going to fight these damn Yankees.
I'm going to fight these there it is. That's exactly.
That's the callback.
So, I mean, one of the first moves he does is he buys Ole Anderson's Championship Wrestling from Georgia.
I thought Vince...
No, Ole started a promotion
after.
That's right. That was
that's
Championship Wrestling.
That's right.
Georgia Championship Wrestling.
Yes.
That the Briscoes and Ole had a small stake in.
Right.
But after they bought that, this is also fucking convoluted.
Oh, it is.
After Vince bought that, Ole started Championship Wrestling from Georgia.
That's right.
That had a TBS time slot. So Jim Crockett Jr. buys Ole Anderson his Championship Wrestling from Georgia. He gets the time slot. Then he buys Vince's time slots on TBS. So now he has all the time slots on TBS, like both weekends, and then I think they have like a morning time slot on one of the weekends too. Like
I'm sure
both like Saturday and Sunday night, and then or Friday and Saturday. One of the two, like two of them, and then a morning show, and all kind of under the World Championship Wrestling banner. It was. He at this point had started promoting his shows as the NWA because he'd started like buying territories.
Right.
He'd started or having working relationship with them. So on top of that, he's the president of the NWA board. He now has a controlling interest in. By '87, Jim Crockett was in his third term as the NWA president, and he either had control or working agreements with the St. Louis Wrestling Club, Bob Geigel Central States Wrestling, Championship Wrestling from Florida, and Bill Watts Mid-South Wrestling. I mean, at that point, you were talking like the biggest territories in the still somewhat relevant NWA.
Right.
Because it's still the early 80s. Like, pro wrestling is not completely national at this point.
No, that's late 80s, mid to late 80s.
So we're still in the consolidation. Like, Vince has already gotten his stranglehold, I think, on the national scene.
Right.
But there was still enough, like, of these promotions, but now Jim Crockett Promotion has them. I also, while I was researching this, found out that they were terrible at deciding where to run shows.
Yes.
They would be like, oh, cool, now we own this territory, let's go run a fucking show in California. And it's like, we never have run a show in California. We don't have a fan base in California, so they would have these arenas that were only half full. Mm-hmm. Because I think what they thought was like, well, we're a national promotion now. We have the national show on TBS. We have all these promotions like in the South and the Southeast. And we're doing pay-per-views now. They did a Starrcade, excuse me, Starrcade 87. Fucking, they did their first pay-per-view, right?
Which one was this one?
I can't remember what the event was, but they were going to run it the same time as they ran their other Starrcades on Thanksgiving. But guess what? Miss McMahon was also going to run her pay-per-view on Thanksgiving called the Survivor Series.
Ooh.
And if you chose to run Starrcade and the Survivor Series both, you couldn't have WrestleMania 4. So a lot of the people were like...
they strong-armed him.
They did, because Vince at this point had a proven track record with pay-per-view.
Uh-huh.
And so they said, yeah, we'll go with WrestleMania 4. We know that's going to be a winner. So the first...
Okay, so 87, I'm sorry, I'm looking this up, was from Chicago.
Which, again, was that ever a wrestling, strong suit for the NWA?
Not for the NWA. Well, no. They would draw big money from there, and that's just been a draw forever. But it's not the giant wrestling town that you want it to be, especially for a Jim Crockett Promotions.
So anyway...
Oh, sorry. The main event that was Ron Garvin, the champ.
The champ, by the way.
The champ of this. Versus Ric Flair in a steel cage match.
Who won that? Ric Flair?
Yes, we all know that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you bring up Ronnie Garvin, because that was a point of contention for the board and Jim Crockett Promotions, that they would do stuff like that. Because now that Jim Crockett owns, or at least has control over so many of these promotions, he can kind of do what he wants as far as the NWA is concerned because he got all the votes now.
Right. He's essentially his